Kevin, why red, green, yellow?
Pardon?
Why the hand is red, green, yellow?
Okay, don't press record yet, man.
Oh, why not?
So,
Break it down, bro.
yeah. So the red's about the blood of African people. The yellow's about the resources of Africa.
Okay.
The green's about the land. And the black is the skin. Yeah, so that's what this is about. Right. You started already now.
Yeah, man, we're rolling.
Alright. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome to Black History at the Hub. I'd like to give a few shout outs firstly to my mum, otherwise I wouldn't be here, my children, my missus who's in the crowd at the moment, and also a load of different authors like Ivan Van Sertima, Robin Walker, Milana Karenga, Afua Hirsch, Zainab Badawi, Chancellor Williams, and all the black historians that allowed me to stand here today. So I want us to begin just by you closing your eyes. If you can close your eyes for a sec. Just think about how you're feeling when you hear this noise. Thank you. Now, whatever feeling resonated in you at that frequency, I'm hoping by the end of these workshops at the end of 33 weeks, not only your experience of the knowledge that's been provided to you, but also a feeling that resonates in you at the end of the course. And we'll talk about that at the end of 33 weeks. So I'd like to give a shout out to Colin Owen, the guy that's made it possible. He's a founder of Right to Thrive, so give him a round of applause, please. Thank you, Colin. So, just a few lesson guidelines for us to begin, because Black history in itself can be a very emotive topic. There's a lot of emotions, especially when you get to sensitive topics like the slave trade. So, firstly, please be respectful. Acknowledge the dignity and validity of others and their experiences, even when they differ from your own. So, Black history. Where did it all begin? And before I start, I'm wondering, all of you in the crowd, what brought you here today?
Curiosity.
Interesting.
Same. I'll be very honest, the difference.
Okay.
Being a white woman, and I have a lot of friends, and I have white partners who are black men. Yeah, difference.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So, our story begins where? In the continent of Africa. And we'll go back as far as 14 million years ago, with pre-humans. So before we emerged as Homo sapiens, there were pre-humans. We can go far back as Kenopithecus, 14 million years ago, and trace a timeline, an evolutionary timeline, all the way to Homo sapiens. There's over 20 pre-humans, but I'll name a few. So Kenopithecus at 14 million years ago, Australopithecus ramadas, Australopithecus afrensis, Australopithecus africanus, Australopithecus ramadas, Australopithecus bosi, and then they all died out. And then came Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and 250,000 years to 300,000 years later, we emerged as Homo sapiens. So what happened? 2.5 million years ago, there was the Ice Age, and there were beings that existed in Africa. And the Ice Age ended about 11,700 years ago. And nowadays, the image of Africa, especially the Sahara, is one of arid, dry and dusty. But after the Ice Age, it wasn't anything like that. There was rivers and animals, and it was lush and nice, and people existed there. the African people at that time were pastoralists, and they herded animals, and they done pottery, and were able to store food. But because of climate, etc., they decided to move on and go to other parts where there was water that was accessible for them for their agriculture. So whether it was the Nile Valley or whether it's more down to South Africa, they started migrating out through Africa. The systems became more complex. As populations grew, they became more complex, and what happened next? You'd have a more complex society with maybe servants and slaves at the bottom and pharaonic leadership at the top, like in Egypt and Kush, etc. Over time, the development of these pharaonic systems, there was great queens that came about, like Dido, Makeda, Nefertiti, Hatshepsut, and Mederes, the famous one-eyed warrior lady from Kush that backed down the Romans in their war. Then there was great kings that emerged, like Thutmose, Nama, etc., Shabaka, Zoscales from Axiom. And there was great technological advances in mathematics, astronomy, paper writing, the development of the calendar, and architecture. As most people know, the 3 pyramids at Giza, the main one, Khufu, is made up of 2,300,000 limestone blocks. And even nowadays, it's still hard to figure out how these ancient people built these structures. So what happened next? There was these great empires and civilizations, but that need to attain wealth, especially in Europe, the Portuguese, the Spanish, even the English, they didn't have much money. There was this privateering going on the seas, and they wanted to make some money. So what happened next? With the gun, the ship, and capitalism came that colonial empire. So, slavery began around 1441 with the Portuguese, with Prince Henry the Navigator, and that continued on. And then slavery came to an end. But how did it come to an end? People have all these different misconceptions about slavery and its ending. But really it was about the slave revolts and also the work of abolitionists like John Brown, William Wilberforce, Alardo Equiano, Ignace Sancho, etc. Then coming out of slavery, I think people thought that everything was going to be all right. Slavery's over, and black people are going to establish some sense of equality or equity, but that didn't happen. So even though there were laws put in place, black people still had to fight to be treated as equal, and the emergence of the civil rights movement came about. But after all that, what happened? There was a lot of struggle against discrimination, racism, and the sort of dehumanising practices that were set upon black people. But after all that time, from 1441 to present day, we have black excellence. So imagine being stripped of your language, culture, your religions, not being allowed to read, coming out of that, and then establishing black billionaires, black scientists, black politicians, black sports personalities, black doctors, black activists, black authors, and black musicians. So black people came a long way from the position that they were in. It was a serious fight and struggle to get to this stage today, where we can sit in a room with people from different cultures and enjoy each other's company. So, over the next 33 weeks, the contents are as follows, and there will be some very sensitive topics, especially when it comes to the transatlantic slave trade. So, this week an introduction to black history. The second and fourth to the fourth week we'll look at human development in Africa and the migration out of Africa. Week 5 to 8 we'll look at the kingdoms of Kush or Nubia or Tarseti and Kemet, known as Uqqa-Ptah, or as the Greeks have named it, Egypt. We'll look at the kingdoms from week 9 to 12 of Axiom, Eritrea and Ethiopia, and also Ouagadougou, ancient Ghana. We'll move on in weeks 13 to 16 and look at the decline of African empires and the beginnings of the transatlantic slave trade. And then week 17 to 20, the end of the slave trade and the civil rights movement. Week 21 to 24, we'll look at heroes, heroines, academics, inventors and villains. And there are some serious villains out there, like Robert Thistlewood, who raped over 3,000 slaves. Week 25 to 28, the presence of black people in Britain, because some people have this misconception that black people weren't here early. Week 29 to 32, we'll look at the modern day contributions of black people and see where they started from the slave trade and how far they've come and what we've contributed. And week 33 to 36, we'll look at navigating racism and discrimination and understanding systemic racism and institutional racism and how to navigate that in your daily lives, because it can become quite overwhelming. So, have you been told the truth? I'm wondering what it's like. Can any of you tell me what it's like when you've been lied to before? How do you feel when someone lies to you?
Angry.
Anger? Yes.
Frustration.
Frustration?
Betrayed.
Betrayed. Very good answer. So, we all know Pinocchio and Jiminy Cricket. Yeah, he used to lie and his nose used to grow. Unfortunately, we haven't got we haven't got that going on in society, so we'd know when people are lying to you. So, have you ever been lied to? Yes, you get angry. But what if I told you that everyone on the planet, regardless of colour, has been lied to through history? And instead of getting history, they've been provided with his story rather than anything else. Now, but how has everyone on the planet been lied to? There's many areas, and I'm only going to cover a few. So, we've been made to think that there are different races. Obviously, racism in itself is a sociological construct and a biological myth. There's distinctions between hair colour and eye colour and things like that, but outside of that, we're all one race. We've been made to think that humans first evolved in the Middle East. So, from the good book, the Bible, and some people have talked about this already, the notion that Adam and Eve came from the Garden of Eden, which was located in Mesopotamia in the Middle East, Iraq, Turkey and Syria. Now that story has been set in stone, but from an evolutionary perspective, the oldest bones of any human's been found in Africa. So, we've been made to think that black people did not write. A lot of black history was lost because black people passed on their history to future generations through talking, through oral tradition. But a lot of the historians, archaeologists, paleoanthropologists, etc., they couldn't read the scripts. So just like in Kush, they had Meroitic script. They couldn't decipher that. It's taken hundreds of years to be able to understand some of it, hieroglyphics and Ge'ez in Ethiopia, so there was a significant amount of writing that couldn't be translated. We've been made to think that the history of black people began with the slave trade. And really at the start I should have talked to you about some unconscious stuff and processing in your mind. So some people may know that you process 11 million bits of unconscious information per second, and only 40 to 50 bits of conscious information per second. So imagine having this notion or this idea in your head that your historical, your ancestry started off in slavery. And what does that do to your mind? And when it's held in the unconscious, how do you operate? Especially when society gives you an idea of who you are through their lens, as being a gangster or unintelligent, etc. 5, we've been made to think that black people are inferior. We've been made to think that white people are superior. We've been made to think that white people civilized black, savage, African tribal people, which in fact wasn't the case. And for many scholars and people that are in the know, understand that black Africans, ancient Africans, were far advanced than anyone on the planet. We've been made to think that black people contributed nothing to the development of the human race, and while some people may think that, other people will think that everything was developed in Africa and repackaged later and sold as their own. We have been made to think that everything black is bad, and we've been made to think that anything white is good. We've been made to think that black people are aggressive and dangerous, And we've been made to believe in distinctions that made black people seem fundamentally different to white people. And Dr. Joy Dugray talks about this, especially in regards to slavery and the cognitive dissonance. When you're feeling upset or understand or know what you're doing is wrong, if you're enslaving people and dehumanizing them, how do you feel better about that? Rather pathologize them, all right? They're dirty, uncivilized beasts that need to be civilized by us, and that will stop that dissonance. We've been made to believe in distinctly different characteristics between black and white, and that's created something, some people in the therapeutic realm might call it a paranoid schizoid split, or it's a psychological binary of two opposing components. So, as a consequence of the teaching and the politics and the social interactions and the narratives that have been spread out there through children's books, the media, and through pseudo-scientists, we've come up with something like this. So, oh, that's not supposed to happen. Why is this backwards? Alright, so, I messed that up. So we have white, and what is the opposite of white? Black. So we've got good. What's the opposite of good? Bad. And remember, these things have been associated with black people. So you've got the slave master and the slave. And you've got the colonizer and the colonized. And you've got the intelligent and the dumb. And then you've got the civilized and the savage, the clean, dirty, beautiful, associated with white, ugly associated with black, majority, and a play on words as well that's used, like ethnic minorities, when we're actually the global majority. So you think that there's a lack of, or you're less than. And remember, we're still talking a bit about psychological processes that are going on in the mind and how it affects people's day-to-day living. Law-abiding for white and law-breaking for black, and leader and follower. So, the lens that provides a description of who we are through the media, black people are provided with an idea of how they behave and who they are. So, it's very narrow, it's very distorted, and it's very harmful, especially on a psychological level. So, what are black people? Are they gang members? Drug dealers? A lot of people like watching programs like Top Boy. Are they drug takers? Black people, especially black women, very angry, they say. Over-sexualized. If anyone knows about the Venus of Hottentot, a lady that was used as a circus sort of showpiece because she had a big gluteus maximus, and they abused her, but also looked at black women in that light. Living in poverty, there's absent fathers, single mothers, problematic students in schools, and if you look at the data in regards to what's going in schools for black children and also Roma children, it seems like they're very problematic. They're violent. They can't be doctors or anything else. They're usually rappers, they're usually musicians, and they're usually sports personalities. So whether there's talk about, and I've never seen the programme of, apart from Hidden Figures, and that came out more recently, but you never see programmes on a regular basis about black people that have become the next lawyer, doctor, astronaut, etc. And they're damn lazy. Right, so, Spike Lee, he's got a quote here that sort of exemplifies what I'm talking about. I think black people have to be in control of their own image because film is a powerful medium. And nowadays when you see films and the imagery and the narrative spun behind the black character, it's usually some dysfunctional character. We can't just sit back and let other people define our existence. And in defining our existence, it's about how you feel afterwards when you're seeing this imagery. Negative social phenomena and the impact on black people. So as a consequence of the historical narratives that have been put out, there's also these other societal phenomena that have come about, like adultification. So you see this a lot in education, where black children are treated like they're older and sanctioned as such. Alienation. The Windrush scandal showed people how alienated, how that feeling made them feel when they've been here for years and years and years, generations, and now, after being here, they've been told that they're going to be deported back to their home country. Brutalisation, and we'll get into that, is whether it's the prison system or the slave trade, black people experience a lot of brutality. Colorism, as a consequence of divide and conquer sort of tactics, dark-skinned people and light-skinned people see each other differently, and black people have issues with their own colour, which can lead to some skin lightening. Dehumanisation, we'll look at that in the slave trade. Demonisation. Black boys, they're gangsters, they're thugs. Discrimination. Fetishisation, so how's the black man's over-sexualised? The black woman's been over-sexualised and still is to some extent. Infantilisation. I remember being young, and when I was working, come here boy, come here son. I'm a grown man. So there can be that way of looking at a grown black man like he's a little boy. Dealing with macroaggressions rather than microaggressions. I say they're macro because they happen on a daily basis to people, so they can't be that small. Prejudice, being prejudged. Prisonisation, we know about the prison population. Black people make up 4% of the UK population, but they're about 13% of the prison population, so that disparity demonstrates something. Racism, dealing with unconscious bias. So imagine dealing with all of these things at different points in time, and some of them you're dealing with on a daily basis. So you might deal with adultification, you might feel alienated, you might have to deal with discrimination in your work. There might be some fetishisation, people looking at you in a certain way. You might have to deal with microaggressions in your workplace, or be prejudged at the bus stop. Deal with racism and unconscious bias all in one day. What does that do to a person? Black fatigue, you feel worn down. To the extent sometimes black people won't want to come here to listen about black history and the harshness of it, because they've been worn down by living their everyday life and hearing this narrative. And again, that has serious health implications for black people. And we'll look at the data in regards to black people and health at another point in time. Black rage. Sometimes people wonder why black people seem angry. If you're dealing with all this and you've experienced trauma through generations and you carry that through epigenetic studies show that you can pass trauma down, why aren't black people sometimes going to be upset about that? Also, low self-esteem, self-love. Do you love yourself? Going through all this and being told who you are. Have you got confidence in your abilities? Are you able to go and do that degree or play for that football team? Do you feel up for it because you've been primed with these ideas of inferiority in your mind? And what's your self-identity like? Living in societies where you have to be white and black to exist isn't easy sometimes. So, what are the benefits of learning about black history? Black history enables us to establish an understanding that we come from an intelligent heritage, not defined by oppression or the distorted lens of others, and therefore contributes to the positive development of one's self-identity and a more resilient sense of self. Remember, we came from greatness, and it is our ancestors that laid the foundation for human development. And remember, if you have a starting point in your mind that black history started with slavery and not with advanced thinkers, you're going to see yourself not as advanced, but more than likely quite inferior. Black history enables us to see blackness as a source of pride, not a burden. Black people are not less than, we are more than. Black history therefore operates as an instrument for the development of a positive self, sense of self-esteem, protecting us against negative societal stereotypes. Black history enables us to place ourselves in categories as potential scientists, historians, not slaves, leaders, innovators, and much more. Black history plays a vital role in the development of one's self-concept, as there is evidence to support this belief. And we'll go through that later. Number 4, Black history enables us to establish an understanding that we are capable of effecting change and self-improvement, developing confidence, resulting in higher academic and leadership skills. And Black history enables us to establish an understanding that change is possible through effort and strategy. Seeing people like you succeed contributes significantly to your belief in that you can too, thereby developing your self-efficacy. So there are some great benefits to learning about Black history. So, I'd like us to look at a few quotes and just think about them a sec. From Marcus Garvey: "A people without the knowledge of their past history, origin and culture is like a tree without roots." And a tree without roots, will it grow? Will it develop? No. And imagine all the young people out there that have got no knowledge of their history and how their development is without it. Harriet Tubman, the Underground Railroad lady that everyone knows, says, "Every great dream begins with a dreamer. Always remember, you have within you the strength, the patience and the passion to reach for the stars, to change the world." And Angela Davis, "We have to talk about liberating our minds as well as liberating society." And I think that's what Black history also does. Liberates you and gives you an understanding on a wider scale regarding what has happened and what's going on now. So, week 1. What is Black history? I'm wondering, can anyone tell me what Black history is for them?
For me, Black history is world history.
That is exactly right. It is world history. Anyone else out there? All right, let's go. So, I'm going to give you a little definition of Black history, even though it's not a small definition. Now, if my son was here, he'd say Black history is the history of people from Africa, the Caribbean, and all over the world. And in basic terms, that is quite a good definition. And this is quite a played out definition, but I think it gives more weight to understanding Black history. So, what is Black history? It is Africa, the birthplace of man and woman. The development of world sophisticated and rich empires. People know Mansa Musa. They knew he was the richest man in the world, from Mali, the Mali king. And they know there was great structures and great pharaonic systems with leaders and great organisation at those times. The creation of agriculture, maths, science, paper, astronomy, architecture and more. Some people may know that Pythagoras spent 22 years in Egypt learning about mathematics. Its economy, its trade and greed, the pirateering that was going on the 7 seas, with the Portuguese, the Spanish, the English and everyone else that wanted that money. It's about myths and wonder, these ideas that Africans had, these sort of mythological creatures like the Blemi and the troglodytes. They had all these different ideas about Africa and African people. It's about capture and enslavement of a people. It's about the slave codes and the black codes and Jim Crow law that restricted black people from attaining housing or being able to vote, etc. It's the destruction of history, culture, identity and religion. It's character assassination, making people see black people in a negative light. It's about rape, torture and the murder of millions of people. It's about anger, sadness, pain and giving up. It is racism, prejudice, hate and discrimination. It's the struggle, hopes and dreams for something better. It's a fight to be equal. It's a fight to the death. It's all the people and movements that fought for equality and justice. It's all those who died for equality and justice. It's a fight for education, to share the same water fountain, to use the same swimming pool, not having to go through the back door and being able to use the same toilets. It's about a 14-year-old boy named Emmett Till who had his tongue cut out. his genitals cut off and a hole bored in his head and left for dead at the bottom of the lake. They tied a fan to him and placed him in the bottom of that lake because he blew a kiss or said something to a lady, a white woman in the shop, when he went to buy something at the shop. It's lies in children's books, biology, anthropology, psychology and science to validate black inferiority. And those taxonomies that have been made by people like Johann Blumenbach and Carl Linnaeus that place white people at the top as superior and black people at the bottom as inferior. And that narrative with these top scientists, they thought, spread across the globe. It's the abolition of slavery, the end of segregation, the Anti-Discrimination Act, the Race Relations Act, and Black History Month. It's going out with someone with a different colour and not being killed. It's being friends with someone of a different colour and not getting treated badly because of your friendship. It's about racist killings and police brutality. It's Cynthia Jarrett, who died in Broadwater Farm. Stephen Lawrence, we all know about. Rashan Charles, who got held in a shop and suffocated. It's about Sean Bell, who got shot. It's about Roger Sylvester, Joy Gardner, Christopher Alder, Derek Bennett, Anthony Walker, Trevor Martin, Mark Duggan, George Floyd, and many more who died at the hands of the police or in racist killings. It's a black president, black historians, black politicians, black professionals, black actors and actresses, black creative artists, black police men and women and others. It's not using the word nigger. Elevation, strength, forgiveness and love. It's then and now. It's us right here under this roof. And it's much, much more. So, your thoughts and feelings. Have you got any thoughts or feelings regarding the material that's been presented so far? Any thoughts?
I think it's so far it's been very thoughtfully laid out and easily digestible.
Oh, thank you. Give him a round of applause for that. Anyone else? Let's move on.
I want to
So,
say something.
yes, of course.
It is very thought-provoking, I think, as a black woman. You know, like you go through these things, but until you sit down and, you know, you think about it, you just go through life, don't you? And you just get on with things. So it is good to be able to sit down and reflect and think, oh, well, I felt that way because of this. It's not just who I am.
Yeah,
it's
that's-
because of the timeline.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Give her a round of applause, that's great. Thank you very much. So, now we'll look at an historical timeline, theoretical ideas and research regarding the birthplace of humankind. So, in getting into black history, there has to be a sort of acknowledgement or understanding of the timeline. When we go through ancient historic timeline, we sort of start in a negative and go into a positive. And when I say that, if we went back further, it'd be 3000 BC, before Christ, or BCE, before the Common Era, or some people will say before the Christian Era, or Anno Domini, as everyone knows what that means. It means in Latin, in the year of the Lord. And CE, the Common Era, or the Christian Era. So, BC, before Christ, and before the Common Era, we'd go backwards, 3000, 4000, 5000. So maybe about 5900 BC, some people say that Tar Seti emerged as a consequence, or Nubia emerged as a consequence of incense burner being found in the city of Questal, and they dated that 5,900 years old. So, we'd be here at 5,900 with the emergence of Tar Seti, and then we'd come downwards 4,000, 3,000, 2,000, 1,000, then to 0. And then we go into AD, where we exist now. 1,000, 2,000, and we're in 2026. So, just understanding that timeline makes sense to what's going on historically. So, black historian perspectives. Now, I think sometimes when it comes to black historians, some people think these black writers have written, but there's bias. Yeah, one of my first ever black history book was written by a white man called Peter Fryer, a great historian who David Olusoga often makes reference to. Staying Power is one of his greatest books, Black People in the British Empire, my first book. So I didn't start with a black historian. I started reading from a white historian that was writing about black history. But sometimes people think, oh, these black people talking about history. But here's some black historians like Malala Karenga and Robin Walker, and they state that the birthplace of humankind's Africa. Malala Karenga states, in spite of religious and secular myths about the origins of humans in Mesopotamia, Syria, Iraq and Turkey, 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, the reality is that humans originated in Africa. And to a certain extent nowadays, even in 2026, there are people trying to refute that still and trying to find out if people really originated in Africa. Robin Walker states, in the Western world, many people are brought up with a Genesis account of human origins from a good book. Even today, the Bible story continues to feed the common sense idea that humanity evolved in the Middle East, which was, of course, where the fabled Garden of Eden was supposedly located. And on the Natural History Museum website, it is stated that scientists assure, remember that's the Natural History Museum, you take your kids there. So if you go there, even there, they'll give you the information that Homo sapiens, us, first evolved in Africa. And we know that every person alive today can trace their genetic ancestry to there. Especially when you have thoughts of mitochondrial Eve, whose DNA exists in every living person. She came about 200,000 to 100,000 years ago, and her DNA is supposed to be in every living person on this planet. Now, it wasn't only black historians out, so we talk about the bias. People say, but you're black, you're going to write about that. But there are other people that wrote about that. The standpoint taken by black historians places a significant amount of emphasis on the principle that Africa is the centre of human development. However, there are many other ancient writers that aren't considered black that also say so. Many writers have emphasised this perspective, including the Greek historian Diodorus Siculus and Herodotus as well, who suggest that Ethiopians were the first of all men. Charles Darwin, people know his name well, identifies the African continent as the home of our early ancestors. Dr. Louis Leakey and his wife Mary Leakey, the famous paleoanthropologist, in the face of great opposition, he strongly supported Darwin's assertion that human evolution began in Africa. As it turns out, Leakey's early controversial, and you've got to think, why was his findings controversial? Finding bones in Africa, what made that controversial?
Would it be because obviously that it takes it away from where they said it was?
Of course, yeah. So that will take away the idea that life began in the Garden of Eden in the Middle East with people that looked more like those in power. Yes.
Can I just, something's been playing in my mind for a while, and hearing you saying a lot of this stuff is just making me going to ask you, do you think this is the case? When you're dealing with Darwinism, tell me if I'm correct, did he say that obviously man came from apes?
Yes.
Right. So, sorry, if I can say, so does that say that, well, in my mind I'm just trying to think logically, would you think that's where a lot of people, knowing that you're saying that the bones come from Africa and they knew that, would that grow into why they would try and call us apes?
Of course.
Okay.
Of course. The evolution of black people in Africa and the mythological thinking and the strange thinking they had about black people at the time, and wanting to validate their superiority, that would be such a great narrative to say that black people were evolved from apes. But you still had those old school images of a black man or a black person and a monkey, and they'd have labels: flat nose on a monkey, flat nose on a black man, elongated ankle, something to do with the legs. So there was this comparison made that was put out there. So yeah, you're right. So, in the face of great opposition, he strongly supported Darwin's assertion that human evolution began in Africa. As it turns out, Leakey's early controversial yet unwavering position that Africa was the cradle of humanity has held up against modern scientific scrutiny and is now universally accepted. There's Dr. Louis Leakey, and if anyone knows about Lucy, that's Australopithecus afarensis. He and his wife have found those ones. Paleoanthropology is a branch of paleoanthropology with a human focus, which seeks to understand the early development of anatomically modern humans, a process known as hominization, through the reconstruction of evolutionary kinship lines within the family hominid, working from biological evidence such as petrified skeletal remains, bone fragments, footprints, the cultural evidence such as stone tools, artifacts, and settlement localities. So you know they go into the muck and mire of old ancient buildings, find the bones, etc., and do their analysis. So, the National Geographic's Genographic Project offers all of us an extraordinary opportunity, a method of tracing each of our family trees back to our African roots. And yes, each of us is African, in essence. And we'll get into that later when we talk about the movement out of Africa and how people changed when we moved out of Africa. Adaptation through natural selection. An ever-growing collection of DNA studies ambiguously demonstrate that each of us has had ancestors who've lived in Africa. Advanced DNA testing also demonstrates that we come back from Africa. And you may be thinking, why does he keep on going on about it? He's saying the same things again and again. But it's just to get in your heads that there will be some points in time, maybe or maybe not, that people will dispute that and maybe in conversation. But there is solid evidence that life began in Africa. Even Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr., while being interviewed on America's PBS NewsHour, stated the roots of every family tree trace back to Africa. So what does this mean? It means Africa is the birthplace of humanity. And on that note, we're going to take a short break. So after all that talk, I'm sure by now you know where the birthplace of humanity is.
Africa.
Yeah, Africa! So, but we'll go through the timeline I talked about there being over 20 different pre-humans. So from Kenya-Pithecus, 40 million years ago, Australopithecus ramadas, and it goes on until they die out. And then came Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and us at the end there. And you know, what you've got to think about when it comes to black history is that there are no dates set in stone. A different author will say a different date, so some authors might say the slave trade started in 1441. It's sort of like approximations, and some may say it started in 1444. So even though it says 195,000 years, some people may say it was 215,000 years, 250,000 or 300,000. Not much more than that. Even though I think the oldest bones found in Irud, Jebel Irud in up the top there, Morocco, about 315,000 years old, and those are the oldest bones that have been found in Africa. So, human development and migration, but let me ask you a few questions. Religious and secular myths suggest that the birthplace of humankind is where? These mythical ideas said that the birthplace of humankind was not Africa, but
Was it
Turkey.
Was it Turkey?
Mesopotamia.
yeah, Mesopotamia. It's well done. Yeah, Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. So, where do black historians and supporting evidence suggest that the birthplace of humankind are? Where do they say the birthplace of humankind are black historians? Where do all humankind come from? Africa! That's like a trick question. If we trace back our family tree, where would our family tree origins be located according to historians and scientists?
Africa.
Africa. In human development, after Australopithecus dies out, What were the last three hominids we identified? The last one being us. Homo habilis, Homo
erectus,
and then Homo sapiens. Name two people that suggest life began in Africa. It could be anyone, apart from me.
Me.
So Robin Walker, Maulana Karenga, all those people, Herodotus, Diodorus Siculus. So, Nile Valley civilizations. I don't know where my picture has gone. I talked about this yesterday. There's something going on with my PowerPoint. Nubia was a civilization that was located, if we go to the top of North Africa, southern Egypt, and below Egypt, Sudan, and northern Sudan. That's where Nubia, Tarseti, or Kush was located. According to some modern scholars, Nubia is considered to be the first major kingdom to emerge on the earth, earlier than the Egyptians. This standpoint is still up for debate among some historians, including the date of Nubia's emergence. So there's always been this back and forth, especially with the sort of notoriety that Egypt have got. When you think about Egypt in ancient times, everyone goes straight there because it was illustrious. They hear the name Tutankhamun, everyone knows that name. Everyone knows the pyramids in Cairo. So it was always at the forefront of being one of the first ancient kingdoms. However, the Sudanese Kushites supposedly had influenced the Egyptians to some extent. According to Maulana Karenga, Nubia's history stretches as far back as 3,900 BCE. However, as I spoke about earlier, Robin Walker suggests that the date of Nubia, first Nubian king, stretches back even further to 5,900 BC. And I've talked about that incense burner found in the city of Qustan. Nubia is known by numerous names, including Kush, Tarseti, which was the land of the bow, because they had such great archers. Their army had these great archers, so they named it the land of the bow. Nubia was famous for its archers and often served in fighting the Egyptian army. Nubia, according to Chancellor Williams, was the main source in providing gold, ivory, ostrich feathers, precious stones, ebony, and animal skins to Egypt. Nubia was also an intermediary for trade with other nations and societies further south. And it was really broken up into three main categories. So, Group A Nubia, Group C, and Kerma culture. So they got more, as they got more complex, that's where it got to Kerma culture. So, Group A develops its own pharaonic and kingship system, developing a royal dynasty at the city of Qustal. Earlier than the Egyptians, they participated as mediators for trade. So, at that stage, that was early Nubia. Then as they developed, this culture interacts even more with the Egyptians. And then in Kerma culture, they became more politically complex and the emergence of powerful kings, just like Shabaka, Pi, and Kashta. After 100 years of political conflicts with Egypt, Nubia, or Kush Tarseti, was effectively colonized by Egypt until 1000 BCE. Now, some people don't know that they were such a powerful civilization or kingdom that they ruled the 25th dynasty. The Kushites were actually ruling, they'd overthrown Egypt and were ruling Egypt for a little while. Two significant periods were the Napatan period and Meroitic period. It is during these periods in history that Nubia is most known. And a lot of the time, with the sort of highlight on tourism and Egypt and those pyramids, everyone thinks about pyramids in regards to Egypt, when the Nubians or the Kushites actually built over 1,000 pyramids, not on the scale of the Egyptians. And there's still probably about 210, 220 pyramids left in Sudan now. So they were also great architects in their own right. Powerful kings like Kashta and his son Pi, who is recognized as the conqueror of Egypt and the founder of the 25th dynasty of Egypt. So there was a lot of interaction between these two, and a lot of taking on of maybe the ideas of Egyptian gods and back and forth with these ideas between them. Powerful, intelligent Pi left a piece of literature which was discovered in 1862 in the ruins of the temple in the capital of Nubia. This was one of Egypt's and Nubia's most impressive pieces of literature, namely the Victory Stela. And I talked earlier about this oral tradition and how they spoke about how African people only spoke and didn't write, but there were so much different types of scripts. So there was the Victory Stela, or Stela, and there was also from Shabaka, who is known for copying and preserving the work of his ancestors, the Shabaka text, and also the Memphite theology. So there was a lot of writing and a lot of documentation that was going on in ancient Kush or Nubia. Women played an important role, and if you go back into the annals of ancient history, women played a central role in a lot. If you look at the queens, especially Queen Hatshepsut from Egypt, she was one of the greatest pharaonic entities ever in Egypt, let alone all the other kings or queens out there. So, the queen in Nubia would be known as Candake or Candice. The king's daughter would emerge as a high priestess and gave her equal economic and political power and influence in the government. So, when we think about the role, and it comes with a colonial underpinning, how women are looked at now from ancient Africa, how they were looked upon as powerful beings that dictated a lot of things when they were in power, and the role of women through colonialism, and what happened to them. All right, you've got the odd queen or whatever, but women are looked upon completely different in the modern age. The queen, mother known in Meroitic as Candake or Candice, had very influential political power in the government. The Nubian Kushite rule of Egypt lasted 100 years and ended with the Assyrian army's invasion. This ended the 25th dynasty of the Nubians. As the Meroitic period begins, we see the capital of Nubia, which was Napata, moved to Meroe. So, after war, etc., and sort of disruption, capitals moved. Meroe was a magnificent city with amazing palaces, temples, pools, observatory, iron industry, and arts and crafts. And it's funny that when you go to all the ancient African kingdoms, whether it was Oyo, Benin, Ifre, whether you go to the Swahili Confederation or Axiom, or you go down to Monomotapa or Cuba and Luba and the Congo, they all had different things going on, whether it's metallurgy, and they were developing tools and weapons, whether it was pottery making, whether they were doing things with yams or different resources and making paving stones and building great spas. I mean, one of the things that people know in regards to spas, especially when the Moors ruled Spain, they created great spas and bathing places, and then when they were defeated, they were told that, by the Spanish, they were told that bathing was a sin. I'll say no more. So, Nubians had a good relationship with the Greeks, who conquered Egyptians in 332 BCE. Right. The Nubians' relations with the Romans were less friendly. The Romans conquered the Egyptians in 30 BCE. Feuding continued with the Romans and the Nubians until Queen of Meroe won back the whole of Nubia. So there was always a back and forth. But the Nubians were good with trade, they had good armies, etc. They interacted a lot with the Egyptians, but whether it's the Greeks or the Romans, whoever, there was always wars going on that either destabilised and overthrew a king and a new king or queen would emerge, or change the sort of dynamics of their kingdom. Nubia was eventually conquered by Axiom, Ethiopia and Eritrea in 325 AD. After the fall of Meroe, Nubia pronounced another kingdom called the Balana culture. Now, by the 6th century, 3 kingdoms emerged. So there was always in a state of flux, these kingdoms. Things over periods of time. But things were always changing and never stayed the same, really. They were conquered by the Muslims in the 1400s. From 5900 BC to 1400 AD, Nubia had a record of great achievements in industry and the development of writing, arts, crafts and international relations. So, some of you may read some books and it may say that Egypt was at the forefront of all kingdoms, all African kingdoms. But there's also literature that will tell you that Nubia or Kush was the first that influenced Egypt. Now, before I go on, we are talking about Africa, and I just want to give you an idea of something. So, if you read Black history, there'll be times, when I first started reading Black history, I'll be reading some literature and it will say about Ethiopia. But it wasn't making reference to actually Ethiopia, and I didn't know what that meant. But the Greeks called the whole of Africa Ethiopia at one time. So if you ever read literature and you think, why are they talking about Ethiopia? It's talking about the Greek interpretation of Africa. They call that Ethiopia. There are Akibulan. People say that in different ways. I hope I can spell it today. They say that's the original name for Africa. And Ethiopia, right, it's very terrible. So, the translation for Ethiopia was the land of burnt faces, given by the Greeks. So, there's Akabu land was supposed to be, there's not a lot of reference made in a lot of books. Some people dispute that this is even true, while some people say, yeah, that was the real first name of Africa. So I'd just like you to know that before we move on, because we are coming to the end in a second. Are there any questions you'd like to ask about anything?
Can you just clarify for me? So the Nubia kingdom, where is it in?
So Egypt, at the bottom of Egypt, southern Egypt, and northern Sudan. So across the border. So right at the bottom, it goes into Sudan and Egypt. And we'll go deeper into Nubia and look at the warrior queen that had one eye that had a good fight with the Romans. Any questions?
How long did it take you to prepare all this? I'm keeping, like, how much have you read?
I do read a little bit. So, can you please close your eyes? Think of something nice. Think about how you're feeling. That's it. Have a good day.